Good evening and welcome to Middle-earth Theater. Yet once again, I'm not Alan Cummings, I'm Seth Meyers. And tonight I'd like to discuss J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy work, The Lord of the Rings, and try to find exactly what sort of meaning we can find in it, and especially given that Tolkien himself was a devout Christian and a lifelong practicing Catholic. What sort of Christian meaning is there in this epic series? Christians and non-Christians alike will watch the movie, and they're kind of hard-pressed to say much more beyond, it's an epic adventure, good versus evil. The One Ring of Power is, obviously evil, and there's a happy ending at the end. How exactly is this different than Braveheart or Van Damme movie or something like that? And the key to understanding that, I think, lies in answering another question, which I'll just address really briefly here. And that's what makes a good story. And I'd like to just contrast Tolkien's friend C.S. Lewis with Tolkien himself. They were famous friends, both Oxford literature professors, both published lots of fantasy fiction works. But Lewis took an approach that was very strongly symbolic. You could say it was allegorical. And in Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, Christ is Aslan. And the symbolism is very strong. When Lucy asks what's the connection between Narnia and, the real world that she's got to go back to, Earth 1, Aslan says, I am in your world there, but there I have a different name. That's why you were brought to Narnia, so by knowing me here for a little while, you may know me better there. So the connection is very strong, and then, Aslan will say things like, every year that you grow, you will find me bigger, and then, we reflect, from Narnia and Aslan to our experience with God and our faith. But to Tolkien, he was much less direct than that. He was almost like Harry Potter, the Horcruxes, where they're spread across several characters, and in this case, storylines and elements of the story. So to Tolkien, a good story's got a lot of adventure, and it's got awe and wonder in it. A good story shows, quote, shoreless seas and stars uncounted, beauty that is an enchantment and an everlasting peril, both joy and sorrow as sharp as swords. To Tolkien, the story encompassed kind of three elements, actually. There was kind of a recovery to show things as they were meant to be, as he said, to understand the world and its, original glory and awe. Second, there was an escape from peril, and what he called the oldest and deepest desire, the great escape, the escape from death. That was a very persistent theme in The Lord of the Rings. Aragorn is always singing these songs that are, looking back to the past, with longing and sorrow, and for trying to remember a more glorious day for Middle-earth, and a sort of hope that they can recover it somehow. And that leads into the final element of a Tolkien story. After recovery and escape, there's a consolation, what he calls the joy of deliverance, the happy ending which denies universal final defeat. It gives a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world, as poignant as grief. Where Braveheart would say freedom, I think Tolkien would say hope. So I want to examine The Lord of the Rings after that fairly lengthy introduction in light of a comment that Tolkien made in a letter in 1958 describing the series. He said, it was mainly concerned with death and immortality. And I'd like to make the claim that we can understand The Lord of the Rings as an extension of Tolkien's Christian faith by examining the views on immortality of its different characters. And we can examine these in light of three key insights from Tolkien. One is to live humbly, to live sacrificially, that is the next, and finally, to live hopefully. That is how Tolkien characters deal with their own mortality or immortality, as it were. To live humbly, first of all, the basic theme, the Ring of Power, is, when you have the ring, races and all of Middle-earth will serve you. That is pretty much the antithesis of humility. But if you look at some of the characters, Denethor, the king of Gondor, steward of Gondor, when Gandalf asked him, he's just discussing with Gandalf how he wished things would have turned out. He said, I wish I could have put my own son on the throne, and he would have been his own master and no wizard's pupil. This is very unlike Lewis when in his own conversion, when he was very like Lewis in his own conversion when he said, "I had wanted to call my soul my own." He does not want to yield to a wisdom outside of himself. Likewise, Boromir is described as proud and fearless, ever anxious for victory and for his own glory. But you contrast that with Faramir, his brother, who Frodo described was a man less self-regarding than his brother. Finally, Frodo and the hobbits themselves are typically considered as, prototypical creatures of humility. They're humble, they're small, they're given advice from Gandalf. All we have to decide is what we do with the time that is given us. So he, even though the weight of the world sort of is on his shoulders, it's not. He just humbly follows the course that's laid out for him. Secondly, live sacrificially. I think this is the key to Tolkien's... Oh, did my battery die? No, battery's still going. Sorry. Live sacrificially. The key to Tolkien, understanding Tolkien's Christian faith as it works out in here. For instance, Gandalf says, none shall pass to the Balrog, and he sacrifices himself for the fellowship so that they can go on. Frodo is considered by many as a priest figure. Christ is considered Christ as the priest, and that he bears the ring. He bears in his own body the weight of the sin of the ring, and then he performs a sacrifice, throws it into Mount Doom. And Aragorn himself is also actually a Christ figure in a very strong sense. He's actually described as a king in exile, and he lived that way, as Strider the Ranger for nearly 30 years. It's kind of odd that that's exactly the time that Jesus spent before he began his ministry on earth, 30 years. And he's also described at one point as because of the doom that was laid on him, yet hope dwelt in him forever in the depths of his heart, from which mirth would arise at times like a spring from a rock. This brings us to the final point, live hopefully. In Theoden's funeral, it's when you read the book, it comes out more explicitly. In the movie, he goes on to live with glory and honor with his ancestors. But here the minstrel sings at his funeral, hope he rekindled and in hope ended, over death, over dread, over doom lifted, out of loss, out of life, unto long glory. But perhaps once again, it's in Aragorn where we find a great deal of the hope. As he's coming to the end of his life, he describes to Arwen, he says, in sorrow we must go, but not in despair. We are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than mere memory. He's also, his name, Estel, the Elvish name given to him when he was adopted by Elrond at 2 years of age. It means hope in Elvish. Finally, he's described as the Elf Stone, Elisar, and Envinyatar, the Renewer, which is reminiscent of Christ, where Christ is described as the cornerstone in Ephesians 2 of the Christian faith. And also, Aragorn is a renewer. Actually, it's a healer. Gandalf describes him as a healer also, and that Christ healed many. So, in conclusion, The Lord of the Rings does show Tolkien's Christian faith, but in spread across the various characters and various elements, and in the way in which the characters, their immortality was cast. And it shows itself in the way they live with Christian humility, like that of Christ. It's found in the way they live through sacrifice, through the sacrifice of various characters, as how others gain and retain life. And finally, they live hopefully with the defeat of the shadow of dread and doom.